Hello everyone and welcome back to a Magic the Gathering Commander Deck List Reviews. So this is a series where I either go through my own personal Commander decks or those submitted by users and break them down to their core mechanics. I talk about the Commander, what the deck's generally trying to do, give my critiques, and then wrap it all up with my feedback at the end. If you want to get your own deck reviewed, make sure to head up to the top link in the description to get your deck reviewed personally by me. Without all that out of the way, let's get into today's review. So today we're talking about one of the most popular commanders from the Final Fantasy set with Y'shtola, Knights Blessed. So this one's kind of an interesting one and a sort of archetype I haven't really messed with a whole lot and I haven't seen a whole lot. So Y'shtola, she's esper color, so 1, a white, a blue, and a black for a 2/4 with vigilance. She's a cat warlock, which could matter at some point for some things, especially the warlock class, because she is a outlaw. You could do some cool stuff with that, but she's at the beginning of each end step. If a player lost 4 or more life this turn, you draw a card, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, Y'shtola deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you gain 2 life. So there's this card is very open-ended. There's a lot of different things you could do with this card. You could go more life gain drain effects, where you're just trying to get a bunch of value off of her second trigger and what that's doing. Initially, I even tried to build this deck sort of an artifact type deck because it's just any non-creature spell you cast, so you can do like a lot of different things. Like mana cheaters is definitely a big thing here. If you can get like affinity for artifacts or something, or something that has a high mana cost that you can reduce or cast for free or whatever, that's usually the best with this card because of course you're paying the least amount of mana to still trigger her. And that's kind of more what we're built around. So this can be built a few different ways, and this is, I would definitely say, is a bracket 4 deck, at least the specific one that we're running. It can be bracketed very easily. She's in Esper colors and, has a pretty okay ability. But even just as a shell, Esper colors, you can very easily make this competitive level. You've got all your, all your counterspell stuff, all your tutors, being in blue and black. You've also got the, consultation, thoracle lines you can run. I tried to steer away from that. I'm not running those lines in here because I wanted to make it, still more accessible for people that want to play this and kind of see what the archetype does. And this is definitely a souped up version of the deck. You do not have to have all the stuff that's in here, but I thought we might as well. She really cares about the specific mana value spell, so this is definitely a control deck still. You're very much trying to manage the board. We've got a lot of interaction in here and a lot of different ways to keep gaining and draining with her ability, and then of course I wanted to make sure we also have some payoffs. We have a good number of win cons in here as well on top of that, but yeah, definitely a lot of counter spells, a lot of things, all the free stuff that we're running in here, so very powerful deck, a lot of game changers, so we're doing the high-end stuff. Speaking of which, here we are. So our board wipes, we got Cyclonic Rift, so it doesn't have to be a board wipe, can also just be an interaction piece. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, and if you overload it, you return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, so it's a one-sided board wipe, instant speed. Of course, the mana cost is very high, and if you do pay the overload, the CMC of the card, overload is a very weird effect because it does not replace the actual mana value of the card. It is just an alternate cost you can cast for the card. So paying that 7 does not make the spell a 7 mana value spell. It's always going to be 2 with Cyclonic Rift and other overload cards, whatever the one is at the top that you could pay, that is the mana value of the card. So it will not trigger Y'shtola, but of course it's just a really good card. One-sided board wipe, instant speed is very good. Everyone knows Cyclonic Rift. Farewell, of course, another just, it's, very good modal sort of card, gets away with a lot of the stuff they wanted to. We can, host graveyards, enchantments, artifacts, whatever, really almost any of these. Of course, we want to keep Y'shtola around, but, if we have to get rid of it, we have to get rid of it. That's just kind of how it goes. And lastly, we've got Toxic Deluge, because it hits that 3 mana value that we're looking for non-creature spells, and then, anything we can pay life into. So there are, a good amount of life pay effects in this deck, but of course, every time we're casting stuff with Y'shtola, we're getting more life gain. So, it kind of balances out, which is kind of nice. Even with Toxic Deluge, if you're paying -2/-2, you're immediately getting that life back. So you're not actually paying any life. It's just a 3 mana, -2/-2 Massacre Worm effect for the whole board. So that's kind of cool. So stuff like that, it's kind of easy, but, Toxic Deluge also is just one of the better board wipes for black, because it does, because the minus instead of the destroy effect, it gets run protection and it gets run indestructible. So both of those are really cool. In terms of card advantage, so Y'shtola does have card advantage on her, and the fact that, she says each end step instead of just your end step, you can draw a card technically 4 times per round. So she's got a good amount of card draw on her, but having to get to that 4 life loss, you have to cast at least 2, you know, with just her 2 non-creature spells mana value 3 or greater to have her trigger herself, which isn't always available. So we have a lot of other ways to get in card advantage as well. So Black Market Connection's very, very good. Triggers her, of course. And then also, you know, the second mode, you can draw a card, lose 2 life. So this is another one that you can lose a lot of life on, but we're able to get it back very easily with her. Velocity Citadel, another one, just extremely good, probably our best card advantage. One of the best card advantage engines in the game. You can look at the top card of your library at any turn. You can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, but if you cast spells this way, they cost a life equal to their mana value rather than paying their mana cost. So that's kind of the thing there. It does have a tap ability. We don't care about that. Just being able to play spells from the top, and this does go into one of our win conditions. Just by itself, though, a very, very good card. Curiosity, Ophidian, Eye type effects. You can run a whole bunch of these in here. Because it is not life loss, Y'shtola does. With her trigger, she does 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. It works with these effects. Because she's dealing damage, Curiosity is one of the effects that just says enchant creature. Whenever enchant creature deals combat damage to an opponent, or just damage, not combat damage, it just deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. So every time you're casting Y'shtola, you're also, you know, not only hitting them for 2, gaining 2, you're also getting some card draw off of that as well. And it's a opponent, which is kind of the nuts thing because she does damage to each opponent, so you're getting 3 cards every single time you're casting something. So very, very good cards to run in this deck. You know, some of our best card advantage engines. They're not as reliable as a lot of card advantage because you have to already have Y'shtola on the battlefield, then you have to get these out, and then you have to cast something else to get the card advantage. But it's a great engine once you can kind of get it started up, but definitely not the most reliable in the deck for sure. Dig through time, so one of our easy ways to cost reduce stuff with Delve. You can put a lot of Delve cards in here. There's only so many you can get in Esper. There's only so many Delve cards in the game because it's kind of a broken mechanic. But Dig Through Time is very good. So you can, it's an 8 mana spell, but you can pay 6 of it with the Delve cost. So you can exile cards from your graveyard to help pay the mana cost. And then look at the top 7 cards of your library. You can put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So kind of a good way to do that. Easy way to reduce it as well. Brainstorm, just another easy one. Of course, you know, we're casting a whole lot of different things, and just being able to cast multiple things in a turn can be kind of nice with some of our effects in the deck. And specifically with Brainstorm, I'll kind of get to it later, but the mana base in here, I've pretty much pumped up, not to the max. We're not running like OG duels or nothing like that, but we've got a lot of fetch lands in here, and so Endwalker, or Brainstorm really it becomes a lot better card when you're able to use fetch lands with it, because, you know, if you don't like the cards that you're putting way to the top, you can use a fetch land, shuffle your deck, you know, any sort of shuffle effects, even tutors, that sort of thing. Brainstorm's a lot better for. Frantic Search, another really cool one. I love this in like all my decks. I think it's just such a good card. So 3-mana instant, drop to 2 cards, or draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards on top of 3 lands. So we are running some, like we're running Cabal Coffer, so this could net you mana in some ways, but it does mostly just hit Y'shtola's ability with a 3 mana cost, gives you all your mana back. So that's another thing. You can run like the Unwinds and, you know, Remand, whatever. There's a lot of counter spells that immediately give your mana back, or just spells in general that can, you know, net neutral mana with that sort of thing, allow you to untap lands, which is pretty good for what we're doing. But this one specifically, I just like that, you know, you're able to kind of fix up your hand and you're getting your mana back. So kind of just a free spell and a free trigger off Y'shtola. Lorien Revealed, so technically a card advantage spell. It's 5 mana, draw 3. Pretty bad for blue, but what we really care about with this card is the island cycling for 1. So we're able to go, you know, fetch stuff up when we need it, but it can be a card draw thing if we need to. And of course, because it is the high CMC, we do trigger Y'shtola off that. Necropone's another really good one, another one that, you know, definitely costs us a lot of life. So we can just basically, Necropone's, it's got sort of a weird text, especially with this old version of the card, but you can basically pay 1 life to exile cards under it, and at the end of turn, you return all cards exiled with it to your hand. You also skip your draw phase, so you don't get to draw a card at the beginning of your turn. You have to just be doing that with Necropotence. So kind of anti-card advantage in that way, but of course you're able to just pay life to basically draw cards. And if you would discard a card, you instead exile it. So it's basically just a 1 turn, hey, I'm going to play this card, you know, pay 20 life or whatever, put those 20 cards into my hand at the beginning of the end step, and then, you know, discard down to 7, or if you do have no max hand size, kind of sculpt the best hand that you can. And, you know, a lot of our stuff can be done instant speed, and we've got some like flash effects in the deck, so this can be sort of just a win con in itself if you get the right stuff out. kind of already talked to Ophidian Eye is the exact same as Curiosity. Kind of cute because it does have flash, which is kind of cool. We can do our, other people's turns if we want to trigger her again. But it is also 3 CMC, so you're able to also get the trigger off of her if you've already, got something going on. So that's kind of nice. But, same thing. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. So just draw 3 every time you're casting non-creature spells 3 CMC or greater. So that's pretty cool. Rhystic Study, again, hits her trigger, but also it's just Rhystic Study. Whenever opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless they pay 1, so most of the time you're just drawing a bunch of cards. So again, one of our better card management engines in the deck. Since it's Divining Top, also very good. It's just a 1-mana artifact. We can pay 1 to look at the top 3 cards of your library and reorder them however you want, and you can tap it, draw a card, and put Sensei Stop on top. So we'll kind of get to the combo. This is kind of, a card you don't really need for the deck normally, but it does combo Balls to Citadel. We'll kind of get to that later, and that's really the reason why it's in here. The One Ring, of course, it's just an amazing card. One of the better card draw engines in any deck. Enters, you get protection from everything, which is kind of cool. And a nice little anti-interaction piece in here. It's not as big of a deal. Usually the One Ring effect, the fog, is incredibly important, and it's still very good for the deck, of course. But we're running so much interaction on top of it that it's not like the biggest thing ever. We mostly care about the card draw. So every turn, you're basically drawing a bunch of extra cards. You draw, or you tap it, put a counter on it, and you draw equal to the number of counters on it. You do lose life at your upkeep equal to the number of counters on it as well, but, we're getting life back, sort of, greatness at any cost is kind of the name of the game for this deck. So you're just drawing, more and more cards exponentially every single turn, which is really, really good. Treasure Cruise are, I think, only our other delve card in the whole deck. You can also delve it. It's 7 to delve, so you do have to exile a whole lot more. But if you can, it's basically just an Ancestral Recall. You can get it on 1 mana to draw 3 cards, so also a good draw there. Triggers your Stola. And Windfall, just kind of at the end here. Another thing that triggers your Stola, and each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So usually it's just, you want to get this when you've got like 3-4 cards in hand, someone has more cards in hand than you. I think that's really when Windfall is the best to play, because you don't want to give people, if you got 14 cards in hand, you don't want to, fill everyone's hands up with that many cards. You usually want to do it when someone has more cards in hand already than you. So not only you actually get card advantage because you're getting more cards, but you're also, depriving them of whatever cards in hand they had. So it's kind of that better effect, because if you're giving them just a whole bunch of extra cards, it's not as good. I mean, at any time, if you just got no gas in hand, Windfall is just a good card. Or, maybe you're milling them out or whatever if you've got enough cards in hand or whatever. But mostly this is best when you can, get more cards than you're discarding with its effect. And here we've got the interaction, so quite a lot of interaction in this deck, way more than I usually run in any of these decks, but it's very good for what we're doing. So most of these are cheated sort of spells where we can get them out either for free or for a reduced cost. So Baleful Mastery, a really good one. So it's a 4-mana instant that says you may pay just 1 in a black rather than 3 in a black. For the spell's mana cost. If that cost was paid, opponent draws a card. So I think in today's world, this would just say, it would be the Bloomborough text, because that's literally what it is, where you gift a card, and if you do, you can reduce the spell's mana cost. And then it exiles target creature or planeswalker. So, kind of the best removal effect gets around indestructible, which is really nice. It gets rid of planeswalkers for 2 mana. Very good. But because even if you are paying the alternate cost, it's still a 4-mana spell, so you do trigger your Stola off of it. Mind Obedience. So this is kind of another weird thing you can do with this deck if you want to. It has Extort, which is honestly kind of the main reason I have it in here. I like the Extort a lot. So Extort is an effect that you can pay either a black or white for whenever you cast a spell. And when you do, each opponent loses life, and then equal to life lost, you gain that. So basically in a normal game, you cast after this is down, you cast any spell, you pay the 1 black or white, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 3. So that's kind of cool. And this is also just a good card as well. Artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So that's also really huge, slows them down. Especially the artifacts. Like the creature thing is definitely, kind of hard, but not every deck has haste, so they don't really care as much about, them coming down untapped. But the artifacts, getting rid of, slowing down everyone's mana rocks, that's super huge. And being an artifact player myself, it hoses those decks so hard. Not having any of your stuff enter untapped is just brutal, especially if you're against like an Urza deck or something that really cares about tapping all their artifacts for something. This is a very, very good card. And then we've got all 3 of the cycle from Ikoria, where we can, cast the card in, if we control our commander without paying its mana cost. So Deadly Rollick, its cost is normally 4, but you can, if you control your commander, pay it for free. Exile target creature Fierce Guardianship, counter target non-creature spell, and then Flawless Maneuver. Creatures you control gain indestructible till end of turn, so kind of the removal spell, counter spell, and protection spell. So we got kind of the holy trinity of interaction with what's going on here, and they're all at least 3 mana cost normally, so we do also trigger Stola on all of them. Dismember, kind of just a good card. It's technically 3 mana cost. It's 1 colorless and 2 Phyrexian black. So you can pay 2 life for each of those Phyrexian black. So you could pay 1 mana and 4 life for this if you wanted to. Give target creature -5/-5 till end of turn, instant speed. So again, it kind of gets around indestructible, and most stuff in the game, especially now in Commander with how it's sped up so far, it's very easy to kill most things with this spell. That only restriction being the -5/-5, but most stuff has at least base that toughness and below that people are ending up playing, especially if you're in a higher level pod like this. Either 4 or 5 bracket, you're gonna see only little creatures for the most part, and if you see something really big, that's usually because someone's winning the game that turn. It doesn't even matter. So just another good card. It is kind of weird that you're giving something, you're paying 4 life to give something -5/-5, so you are losing quite a bit of life to just pay the 1 mana cost, but because of that you are gaining some life back, and it's mostly to hit her ability is what we care about there. If the creature is inconsequential, a lot of times that can be good enough, especially if it gets you that card draw. Might as well. Force of Despair is kind of another interesting one. If it's not your turn, you may exile a black card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost. So again, free spell, and destroy all creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. So this is really great if someone's playing like tokens. Really is kind of the best thing. So you're able to, destroy a bunch of skewed swarms or something like that. Or if someone plays, like an X cost, like Secure the Wastes or something like that, or, White Sun's Zenith or Twilight, something like that, makes a whole bunch of things at once. Or if they just cast a whole bunch of things and they go to combat, if they're like a haste deck or some sort of thing, like a Samet deck where they're trying to get in extremely fast, you're able to play this and kind of wipe the whole board. So that's kind of a nice one. It's a little more edge case than a lot of other cards, especially with an interaction suite. But even if, there's just one giant creature that comes in that you want to get rid of, even if they're not attacking, you're just like, oh, they just played, a huge spell. They played a Jane Cataxius or something, crazy. And you're like, oh, they just played that. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that. So that's kind of nice. And again, the 3 CMC, really what we're caring about here. Force of Negation as well, so same thing, except you exile a blue card rather than a black card, and you counter target non-creature spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting its owner's graveyard. So again, just a counter spell that we can cast for free, and the counter spell that we can cast for free with Force of Will. So Force of Will, normally a 5 mana counter spell, but you can pay 1 life and exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay its mana cost, and it's just counter target spell. So Force of Will being probably the best counter spell because it's the very easy to pay. It doesn't have any. So Force of Negation and Force of Despair, a lot of people I think forget that these aren't just straight up free counter spells that you're able to exile with. It has to not be your turn. So if you're going off on your turn, I've seen people play it like this, where your Stola is doing her thing, you're doing some sort of infinite, and you try to play this on your turn. You have to pay full price for Force of Negation because it is your turn. You have to kind of play around that. Just something to keep in mind when you're doing this. But Force of Will, you literally can exile the card whenever. Doesn't have any restriction on that. You do have to pay 1 life, which again is whatever, and it's countering any spell. So Force of Negation and Fierce Guardianship care about non-creature spells, which a lot of the time is what this deck is going to be caring about. If any sort of removal or board wipes or anything like that, or counter spells to our stuff, being able to recounter that is kind of the biggest thing with these spells that we care about. But every now and again that can be a pretty big drawback if someone's playing like a Crater Hoof, that you're like, I need to counter that on the stack or else I die, or like an Avacyn where like I can't destroy stuff if this resolves. It is nice to have Force of Will as the literal catch-all for everything. Generous Gift, kind of another catch-all, destroy any permanent, and they get a 3/3. We don't care about the 3/3. We're not really attacking most of this game, and hits our mana cost that we were looking for. Propaganda, hits our mana cost, and it's an enchantment that, people can't attack you unless they pay 2 for each creature they control attacking you. So this is another good, anti-aggro sort of effect. And just in general, people will not be paying this. 2 mana is a lot to pay per creature unless they're doing some sort of Voltron type deck. Most of the time, people just can't afford it because they have other stuff they want to pay. And that's something I never really thought about when I first started playing, that 1 or 2 mana tax for anything mattered that much, but it really, really does. People hate paying extra for whatever they're playing with, and so these sort of effects are really good for what we're looking for. Snuff Out, another kind of cool one. So if you control a swamp, you may pay 4 life rather than pay the spell's mana cost. It's a form of CMC spell, so you're able to cheat that. And destroy target non-black creature, it can't be regenerated. So kind of an old one, a little specific. You can't get rid of non-black stuff, but that's most other creatures in the game. Pretty wide for what it is, and being able to cast it for free. And with this deck, we're always going to usually be controlling a swamp. And then Teferi's Protection, again, hits our mana cost, and it's just the best fog in the game. It's a game changer for a reason. It's extremely good. Just until you're into your next turn, your life total can't change, and you have protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out. So this can be really nice for certain effects. So if you've got something that would force you to lose life, so you got to be kind of careful with this as well. So if you cast Teferi's Protection, maybe you would die to your One Ring or whatever. Let's say you have like 10 counters on this, you've been tapping over and over again, and you're getting really close to dying, or you would die before this resolves. You can cast Teferi's Protection to make it so your life total can't change. So even if this tries to do damage to you, for one, you can't be damaged because you have protection from everything, but your life total can't change. So if anything would even make you lose life because your life total can't change, that life loss doesn't matter. So like Black Market Connections, this one specifically works because it does not ask you to pay life. It just says you lose life. So with Black Market Connections, if you have been Teferi's Protection, you can pay all these, you just get the effects, and you don't lose any life because your life total can't change. But because your life total can't change, you can't pay the 1 life for Force of Will. You can't pay the Phyrexian mana cost for Dismember. Because your life total can't change, you are not able to pay the life that it requires to be able to cast whatever alternative cost. So you got to be very careful with this as well, in the way that you try to use it. So if something just says you lose life rather than you have to pay the life as just sort of an after effect and not a cost, it works with Teferi's Protection. Otherwise, you just have to wait, which not a huge deal. This card is just good enough on its own, but kind of just another weird edge case I thought I might point out. And lastly here we have Withering Torment, again just kind of another one I really like. 3 mana instant, destroy target creature enchantment, you lose 2 life. So I just like that it hits our mana cost, and not a super wide net, there's a lot of other things in here, but we're getting rid of a good amount of stuff with that, and mostly the mana cost. I really want to make sure that we're hitting that and we're getting as many triggers off Y'shtola as possible. Then as for lands, it is definitely a very heavily upgraded mana base. You do not have to have it this upgraded. I will say just in general, this deck is very expensive. A little bit of that comes from this Y'shtola art that I'm using. You definitely don't have to be playing with this artwork. There's one that's like $100 cheaper you can use. But we are, this deck heavily benefits from the very expensive, very good counter spells and, free spells, because that is exactly what the deck is trying to do and what she triggers off of the most. There's a lot of other ways you can build this, but we are definitely going balls to the wall with what we're doing here. So not a whole lot of basics in here. We're only running a few. I think we got 3 islands, we got 2 swamps, and 1 plain. So very, very few. But we are getting a lot of our basic land types. So we're running all the stuff that cares about basic land types. We got, all 3 verges. We've got the fortresses, that sort of thing that care about our if we have basic land types, the check lands. I don't know what check land this would be considered, but check lands like that. We've got our basic Exotic Orchard command tower. We've got Bajuka Bog, just because you might as well get the exile and graveyard hate on that. Cabal Coffer, so this is awesome with all of those basic land type effects where we can add Black for each swamp we control. We are of course running, if you're going to run Cabal Coffers, you might as well run Urborg. I think it triggers the wall off of each other. We're running the bond lands as well. We've got our Tri-land in here. We've got our Tengu lands, Reliquary Tower, even all 3 of our Surveils. Urza Saga, because we do care about, Sensei's Top is a very good card, and there's a good amount of artifacts in this deck. We can tutor up with that. We're running all 3 of our colored fetches. I didn't want to go too crazy with fetches because that also drives up the price quite a lot. But we do have all 3 of our in color fetches for what we're looking for. So kind of just a lot of stuff in here, shocks everything. Mystic Sanctuary is really, really good. And then I guess kind of in the middle of all this is Mistrais Village. So it's a little hard with this deck because this is sort of a teamer card, where it enters tapped unless you control a mountain or forest, which, we aren't in either of those colors, but you can pay a blue and tap it to give your next spell be uncounterable. So that's kind of the big thing here. If it enters tapped, being able to resolve whatever you need to resolve is worth it. This is a very good card from the new Tarkir set that it's worth running, even though it's always a tap land. But a lot of good synergy in here. Make sure that we can get out Tri-lands are super huge with what we're doing here because it turns on literally all of our lands if we're able to do that, which is really cool. But yeah, very much a pumped up mana base. Don't need it, but it's very helpful for what we're doing and all the utility that we get out of it. In terms of ramp, we have a good amount of ramp in here, not a whole lot. You can definitely, this is something you can pump up more if you want to, but just enough that we're able to cast a lot of our stuff. We do have stuff that's pretty low to the mana, low to the ground, mana cost wise. And we do have, it looks like we have quite a high curve, but something you got to remember is the fact that a lot of the stuff that we're casting is free. We're going to be, we have 4 3 mana stuff, and of course 3 is what we're trying to hit with the deck. So of course that's going to be the highest because, that's, our kind of threshold. But a lot of that's free. So even if it looks like we do have, quite a lot that we're trying to curve out into. Almost none of the time are we actually casting it for that mana cost. So kind of take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, a little bit of ramp here, just mostly, our artifacts to be able to cast our stuff. And I will say the artifacts do have a little bit of extra utility. We'll talk about a little bit later, but we got our Soul Ring, all 3 of our talismans, Arcane Signet, and then some of our more expensive stuff. So we got Chrome Mox and Mox Amber, just, for a little bit faster mana, Dark Ritual, Black Market Connections again, because, it's first mode, you can create treasure tokens, so that kind of repeatable. Our ramp is kind of nice. Morning Revealed, we talked about earlier, has island cycling, so we can go grab that when we need to. And also, kind of weirdly in here, I was like, if we're going control, we might as well go a little bit of stacks with Grand Arbiter Augustine the Fourth. So this is a 4 mana 2/3. It says white spells you cast. Holy crap. White spells you play cost 1 cast to... oh my god. White spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. I can't read that card because it's got old weird text. Blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and when spells your opponents control cost 1 more to cast. So, this is a very good card. It does a lot for our deck, and that's why I mostly am running it in here, because it produces our spells by a good amount. That's kind of the ramp part of it. And you wouldn't think the 1 extra mana that all your opponent's spells cost would matter too much, but it throws people off their curve. I've had to play against this card a lot, or play with it, and when you're doing that, it really does mess you up on everything. Having to play 3 for an Arcane Signet, turning into a worse Command Sphere sucks. Turning your Command Sphere into a worse, like, Sisay's Ring, like, it gets way, way worse every time you do that. Especially if you're playing faster, if you're playing your low mana stuff, it very much feels a lot more expensive to play anything. So that's kind of the big thing in here. You're getting a little bit of extra that, but of course we do have a lot of white and blue spells in here to reduce the mana cost to get even more triggers off our commander. So that's kind of nice. So yeah, not a whole lot of craziness in here. I mean, we do, the Moxen are definitely one of the more expensive pieces that we're playing with, but I think they're very valuable for, just the deck that we're running, having that fast mana. And like I said, there's a few things that these artifacts kind of do that is good for a combo that we'll also talk about. Tutors, we got a few tutors in here. You could run, if you wanted to, Mystical Tutor as well. I didn't run it in here just because we have enough stuff, and we're doing, I think, most of the time we have interaction, or we're going to be able to get to interaction pretty easily. So I didn't worry about it too much, and really these are the tutor or combo pieces. That's what we mostly care about. So Beseech the Mirror, so you can bargain it, so you can sacrifice an artifact or enchantment or token as you cast a spell. You search your library for a card, exile it face down, then shuffle. If the spell was bargain, you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost if its spell is mana value 4 or less, and then put the exiled card into your hand if it wasn't cast this way. So you either, for the 4 mana, usually this card is much, much, much better when you're able to just bargain it, which we do have a good amount of enchantments and artifacts in the deck. So a lot of times you can end up bargaining it, and if you can't, it's not the worst thing ever to get what you need in your hand. But being able to cast something, tutor up something and cast it for free is really, really cool. In a lot of ways, it can act like a free spell because you are getting something for less. So being able to just pay basically the mana cost of a card in your deck and immediately play it into, bring it into play is pretty cool. Grim Tutor, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle, you lose 3 life. So both of these also trigger off your Stola, which is kind of nice. Again, just kind of generically good tutor. Demonic Tutor, again, generically good, get it whatever you need. Imperial Steel, a little expensive for sure. It's an over $100 card, probably I think the most expensive card in the deck. Not necessary by any means, but again, I'm trying to steer away from the sort of Thoracle Tainted Pact combo, and so just running a lot of the tutors we can get to sort of our, I can't say janky combo, but expensive combo is kind of nice to have. And lastly, of course, Vampiric Tutors sort of just to round out the number of, staple tutors you could run. You could also run like Beseech the Queen in here, or that sort of thing if you wanted to run more. It's very easy too. Then out here we got a good amount of value stuff here, just kind of random stuff that we either get, extra triggers is a lot of what this is, and then some flash stuff as well. So Born Upon a Wind, pretty good. 2 mana instant, you may play cast spells this turn as though they had flash, draw a card. So this is good for a multitude of reasons. One, to catch people off guard. If you're like, okay, at my opponent's end step, I flash this in, or I cast this so I can flash in stuff out at my opponent's end step, either to, maybe attack with it or whatever, or have stuff ready for the beginning of your turn. If you got like two big spells you want to cast, especially with our win condition, big things want to cast like Aether Flux, being able to get that down the turn before your turn and then start it with your turn gives your opponents the least amount of time to deal with it before your turn starts, and it also gives you the ability to start your turn with it already down to start the sort of storm with it very easily. Delny, so she's kind of a weird one in here. She double triggers abilities of creatures with power 2 or less. So Y'shtola is a 2/4, so she does double trigger, which is really cool. And that's kind of nice, specifically because her ability needs to trigger twice for her to trigger her extra ability at the beginning of the end step. So if you with Delaney out and her out, you cast one thing with 3 CMC or greater, you get her bottom trigger twice, everyone's lost at least 4 life, and then you also get the double trigger at your end, at whatever end step to draw 2 cards, because just with one spell you're able to do that. So it allows you to hit that trigger a lot faster, which is really nice. On top of a few extra things, but that's mostly what it's in here for. High Fate Trickster is kind of, same with Valley Flood Caller. They just allow us to cast spells as though they'd flash. So this is just any spell as though they had flash, and then non-creature spells, which is most of our deck with flash. This also has flash. They both do. And we'll flash them in, which is kind of nice. But again, just another way to kind of play around whenever we want. And it's kind of nice for a control deck to be able to play on anyone's turn. You're able to hold up mana for counter spells if you want to. But the only bad thing with control decks is a lot of times you're having to, stay shields up to be able to interact with other opponents to make sure they're not going off. But, if you can't really develop your board state if you're always shields up. And so with flash, you're able to always have your shields up, but, beginning of opponent's end step, if no one has done anything for the whole round, you flash all your stuff in, start your turn, hold up your mana. You just always get to wait to the last second to do your stuff, so you can have your defenses up as much as possible. Arenicus' Vile Duplication hits Y'shtola's ability and says create a token that's a copy of target creature token or creature you control, except token has flying, doesn't really matter, and it isn't legendary if that creature is legendary. So Arenicus and Spark Double do the same thing. You get a copy of Y'shtola, and both of them make the copy non-legendary. So that's super nice, being able to get another Y'shtola out. So you're getting double triggers just generally. I'm getting double draw triggers, all that sort of stuff is kind of nice. And just that's kind of most of what this value is just a bunch of double triggers. Phyrexian Metamorph. So this does not work with It does not work with Y'shtola because it would be a legendary copy that would legend roll away, but I like Phyrexian Metamorph mostly just as a thing to copy opponent's stuff. It's just like a Gilded Drake sort of effect where you're just like, okay, you've got something really good on the board, I want to be able to copy, cool. Or, there are some stuff in our deck that we might want to copy with Phyrexian Metamorph as well, so that's kind of cool as well. Roaming Throne, so this is literally just another way to copy your triggers, basically just Delaney again. I'm getting double triggers off of Y'shtola doing whatever she ends up doing. Same benefits as well, where you only have to cast one thing to get her trigger for the instant draw cards, which is also cool. And lastly here we have Sabine's Reclamation, so this again hits our cost for Y'shtola, and says return target permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If the spell is cast from a graveyard, you may copy the spell. You may choose new targets for the copy, and has flashback 5. So again, this is really big because it allows you to get something back 3 or less from the graveyard, which most of the stuff in our deck is going to be 3. It is a permanent card, so this can even grab fetches if you're really kind of in a bind. Need the extra mana, you can do that as well. But a lot of our deck is 3 CMC or less because we're trying to hit that 3 CMC with a lot of the stuff we're doing. So this gets us a lot of stuff back from our deck, which is really cool. And of course, the flashback is kind of nice. Kind of gives you double triggers off of this. So you can get, up to 3 cards from your graveyard from this. And it gets you 2 cast triggers from Y'shtola on top of that, which is also nice. And lastly, here we've got our win condition. So I kind of already talked about Aetherflux Reservoir, but kind of explain what the card is. So Aetherflux Reservoir, busted card, very good in a lot of decks. Very easy win con to get to for a lot of decks. It's 4 mana artifact that says whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you cast this turn. So sort of life gain storm, which is kind of cool. But of course, the big thing here is when you can pay 50 life to have Aetherflux Reservoir deal 50 damage to target player or creature, any target, I think, anymore. So that's kind of the nuts thing here. We're going to be gaining a lot of life off of doing a whole lot of different things with this card, which is kind of the big thing here. Casting a lot of different spells, getting a bunch of life off of doing so, if we want to. And with a lot of it, we're gaining life whenever you just use Y'shtola triggers in general. So this is a good outlet for that, for our life gain, whatever we end up doing. You can kind of do it that way. Though, honestly, it pairs the best with sort of our 2-3 card combo here with Bolas the Citadel and Sensei's Divining Top. So Bolas the Citadel says you may pay life equal to the mana cost of any cards from the top of your library to cast them, and Sensei's Top allows itself to be put on top of the library. So the way this works is you have Sensei's Top and Bolas the Citadel on the field. you know, whatever the top card of your library is, it doesn't really matter. You can cast it if you want to, but the biggest thing on the Balls of Citadel, you can't play lands from the top, but once you're out of lands to play, or, you know, land drops to use, you can brick very easily. If you just hit a land, you're like, well, I can't do anything with this, I can't draw cards, I just kind of run out of the thing. And with Balls of Citadel, you kind of want to do as much as you can with it the turn you get it out, because it is very, you know, it's a top priority card for almost any player to get rid of it. It's, you know, very busted, does a lot of different stuff. So doing kind of this in the one turn, Sensei's Top is very good for that, because it allows you to draw a card and put Sensei's Top on top. So whatever card was on top gets put in your hand, which is really nice, and then Sensei's Top goes to the top. So you're able to then, once Sensei's Top is on top of your library, you get to pay 1 life with Balls of Citadel to put it back on the field, and then whatever new cards on top of your library, you may cast that. Or if you don't want to, use Sensei's Top again, draw it, put it on top, and you can kind of just repeat this process any number of times as you want. You do definitely have the, you know, it's a life resource, you're still paying 1 life every time you're casting with Sensei's Top and whatever else you decide to cast with Balls of Citadel, so you got to be a little careful there. But you are casting Sensei's Top every single time you're doing this, and so if you're able to pair it with Aetherflux Reservoir, this is where it gets nuts, because at a certain point, you're going to be gaining more life than you're losing when you're doing the Sensei's Top thing. Very, very early on, really. When you start doing this combo. So if you can get this off, or even if you can have, you know, hit Aetherflux at some point down the line, you're able to look through, you know, if you got 40 life or whatever, you're able to look through, you know, a good, you know, 30-year deck or whatever when you're doing this. So you're able to get Aetherflux down, you're able to gain life off of keep, you know, casting Sensei's Top over and over and over again. And then at a certain point, you're able to just have enough life, you know, you're gaining 20, 30 life every single time you're casting a spell, and you can just kind of dump that into Aetherflux and kind of win that way. So that's definitely a way to do it with sort of that 3-card combo. And one of the other major combos we're doing in here is the Exquisite Blood Sanguine Bond combo. So these were the original 2 cards that you could do this with. One says, whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, and then the other says, whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. So there's only so many effects of each side, but we are running pretty much all of them that we can. So for the better of the 2 effects by far is whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. So these cards just in general are very good for what we're doing, because either side of it, you know, your Stola deals 2 damage to each opponent, and we gain 2 life. So either side, we're dealing extra damage. So with Exquisite Blood or Bloodthirsty Conqueror, whenever opponent loses life, you gain that much life. We're gaining 2 life, dealing 6 damage total, 2 to each opponent, and then we would gain 6 off that life loss again. So every time you're casting a 3 CMC or up non-creature spell, you're gaining 8 and dealing 2 damage to each opponent. It's pretty nuts. Pretty good just on that aspect of things. On the other side of it, these enduring tenacity effect, same thing. Veto does the same thing as Sanguine Bond. All 3 of the effects are just the exact same. Not quite as good because it's also target opponents. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So it does do 8 damage and you gain 2 life. So kind of flipping the script on what's happening. It's only target opponent, so you kind of beat someone down with that. But the big thing with the other half of this, just Bloodthirsty Conqueror and Exquisite Blood would probably be good enough to run on their own, just because they are so good for what we're doing. And, you know, if people hit each other or they lose life for any reason, you're gaining that much life. It doesn't just have to be your doing. With life gain, you're pretty much the only one that's going to be gaining you life. So it's not as good as that. So you're gaining a whole bunch of life just incidentally off these 2 as well. But the big thing here is when they're used in conjunction with each other. So whenever opponent loses life, you gain that much life. Whenever you gain life, opponent loses life. So that's just the infinite combo. You're able to just drain out your opponents by doing that. And sometimes it's going to be a little difficult, because even if you have both cards down, you have to trigger the life loss or the life gain, which our commander does both. So as soon as we do that, we cast literally anything else that triggers her, the thing gets started, and then everyone dies. So that's kind of the thing with it. And this is what a lot of our tutors effects are kind of going into. Kind of a weird one, sort of an older combo, pretty well known. It's got some newer pieces, like Enduring Tenacity and Bloodthirsty Conqueror, sort of our newer ones. But pretty much any piece of the combo, the lowest mana value you can have for this combo is 8 mana. It's either 8 or 9 mana to get this off. You know, either, you know, a 4 mana and a 5 mana, or 3 mana and a 5 mana. So it's going to be very expensive to do this, which is kind of why we have so many tutor effects, and, you know, we have a good amount of ramp and some fast mana, because this is going to require a lot of mana to get this combo off. It is definitely not the quickest and most powerful combo there is, but I thought it worked pretty well with what we're doing on both aspects, just as single cards and with the combo, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of the part of it. But if you can get it off, it does a whole lot with what we're doing. And of course, we are getting losing life, whatever. Also works pretty well with Aetherflux Reservoir. In general, Aetherflux kind of just works with pretty much anything we're doing in here. We are also getting a good amount of mana when we're doing this and just kind of through turns. So like Exsanguinate is pretty good. Each opponent loses X life and you gain life equal to life lost this way. So if you put 15 or whatever in Exsanguinate, everyone loses 15 and you gain a total of 45. So just another way we can kind of drain our opponents, get a little extra value off of that and maybe kill them at some point. We're not like a super huge X spell deck, so you're not always casting this for the biggest amount of mana that you could. Though with X spells, the way that it works is whatever you pay into X, let's say you pay X equal 3. On the stack, that spell is a 5 mana spell. It's 3 colorless, whatever you paid into X, and then the 2 black pips. So that does trigger your Stola. So if you do it for the right amount of mana, at least 3, so you pay at least 1 into Exsanguinate, you're able to also just get the trigger off of her, which is kind of nice with those X effects. Our other one in here is Torment of Hailfire. This is by far the better one. It's, X black sorcery that says repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices an online permanent or discards a card. So really you want to pay a good amount into this, even like 10, really. I think that's kind of, that sort of thing you want to do is get a lot out of this. But basically what this ends up doing is either your opponents have to lose a whole bunch of life, they have to sacrifice most of their board, or they have to discard most of their hand. And at a point, if you cast this for large enough, it doesn't really matter which they pick because they'll just kind of run out of cards at a point and that'll be it. But even if you cast this, really, I think 5 or 10, if you can, which is still a big ask, 7, 12 mana is a lot, but you really want to try to make this a game ender if you can. But with that, being able to, they're already going to be losing a whole bunch of life from what you're doing. You are destroying a good amount of their permanents with a lot of the interaction we have. We're putting them to the graveyard. They don't, most people don't want to discard cards if they don't have to, but even if you aren't killing everyone with this, you're depriving them of pretty much all their resources, all the stuff they have on the battlefield, all of the stuff in their hand and their life. So every resource that they have access to, you're getting rid of. With this effect, whether they want to or not, they have to kind of pick and choose. And so even if this does not end up killing your opponents, you're still putting them so far behind that you usually end up winning anyway. Kind of just a really good card. A lot of people might call it sort of a boring win, but we are control. We have to have some sort of win con in here. Just destroying everything. It doesn't really do anything. We're not actually advancing our game plan. I don't ever really want to make a deck that's just, hey, I'm going to sit at the board and we're just going to have this really long game because I won't let you do anything. If you're going to play one of these decks, I definitely say have something that you're able to do. Advance your board state. Don't just slow everyone else down. Just sort of a PSA about that. And then lastly, here we have Hullbreaker Horror. So this is the combo piece with our artifacts. So it's a 7 mana Kraken Horror that has flash, so this spell can't be countered. And whenever you cast a spell, choose up to 1. Return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So this very, very good card. It works really well with a lot of the stuff we're doing. It can be a very good control piece because it can bounce on them permanents, or it can counter spells by returning the spells to our owner's hand, or our opponent's hands. This is just a great control piece. If you get this out, usually the game's kind of over because you've cast anything in speed. It works really well with anything that we're casting at flash speed. Even if you want, you have this and you flash out Delny, you still get a trigger off of this. So a lot of our spells become even better because they work on top of whatever their effects are, either counter spells or removal. So that's kind of the intended purpose of this card, I think, is that sort of thing. But where this breaks is the fact that it does say return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand. But what it doesn't, well, because normally that would just be an Infinite Storm. You'd cast it, cast trigger, you'd bounce it to your hand. You could, do stuff like that. But we are still using this infinitely. So it says return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. It's just its owner, so you can target your own stuff. And so this is where it kind of gets pretty crazy. If you're able to have Chrome Mox, Mox Amber, Soul Ring. So those are the two, you need 2 of those 3 for this to go infinite. So you cast, you have Soul Ring on the battlefield and you cast Mox Amber or whatever. When you do this, you bounce Soul Ring to your hand because you cast Mox Amber, it triggered. Soul Ring goes to your hand, you have Mox Amber down. And then, of course, before you do that, you tap Soul Ring for 2 mana. You bounce it to your hand. Just anything that goes mana positive is really what we're talking about. So you could have Soul Ring and a Talisman. That would be good enough as well. You play the Soul Ring, you play the Talisman, bounce the Soul Ring with the 2 mana. It's back in your hand. You have the Talisman down. You use one of the 2 mana to play the Soul Ring, bounce the Talisman over and over and over again. So you're able to incur Infinite Storm. So you're casting an infinite number of things. But the biggest thing with it is you're getting infinite mana. So you're able to keep doing that over and over and over again. Where it gets the most broken, of course, is if you do have flash, because you can do this on any turn. So you can literally lock your opponents out from doing anything in the game. You can bounce all their non-land permanents to their hands, and if they try to cast anything, you just do the loop once or twice to bounce all their stuff to their hand. So you can lock them out that way. That's definitely a thing that you can do. Or, if you do end up doing it with just infinite mana, we have those mana outlets with stuff like Torment of Hellfire and Exsanguinate to just end the game with that. So another really good card, able to flash in, which is kind of cool. It also can't be countered, so it's a very strong sort of endgame piece. Get in at your opponent's end step, untap with your mana, and they kind of do the thing, just kind of go off. So that's another big reason we really care about our artifacts and having the low CMC stuff, because it does matter to have mana positive arcs. Even with Chrome Mox, even if you're not getting mana from it, with a Soul Ring, that's just good enough. Being able to pay 0, you're still getting the bounce back, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, that's sort of our Y'shtola deck here. Just a lot of cool stuff, you know, very controlly. That's kind of what she's wanting to be built around. Like I said, you can build this around other stuff if you want to. You can go way more like life gain triggers because you are getting a bunch of life, or life loss triggers off your opponents. You know, if you wanted to build it more sort of that way, you could. Like I said, you could also build it off of any non-creature spell. You could do like artifacts if you wanted to, or you could do enchantments or something if you wanted to go more that direction. But I think this specifically uses her ability the most, and kind of, you know, with the way that her card sort of reads, I think this is the way that it's meant to be used for the most part, sort of that controlling thing. And esper colors, that's kind of just what you're looking for. But yeah, I hope you all have enjoyed this video. If you want to take a look at the decks list on Moxfield, I will leave a link to that in the description. If you want to look at all the other deck list reviews I've also done, I will leave a link to that YouTube playlist in the description as well. But besides all that, I hope all of you have enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.